Hello everyone, welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Why do I do this to myself, guys? Today's book is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. A book first published in January 1st, 1991. It has been translated into over 30 different languages since then and has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide. The Evangelical Christian Publishers Association even awarded Redeeming Love with the ECPA Gold Book Award, an award that recognizes books that have sold over 50,000 copies. In 2005, the ECPA Platinum Book Award was also given to it, which is presented to books that has sold over 1 million copies. In 2009, the Spanish edition Redeeming Love, titled Amor Redentor, I apologize to any Spanish-speaking viewers, was presented with a Retailer's Choice Award, given by an awards program that seeks to acknowledge the best new Christian products of the year, based on the impact they have had on staff and customers. In the Spanish category of 2009. I ran off like that's a new sentence. In 2022, a film adaptation of the novel was made its way onto the big screen, though notable that it had been delayed about a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Apart from that, let's just go on to the report card. I can get on with this with you guys. And with the report card out of the way, let's discuss the cover. Or, well, covers, considering the age and relative popularity of this book. Now, from what I could find online, many of the covers are more Harlequin-esque covers. What I mean by that is that they're very minimal and almost never tell you anything about what the story's actually about. The ones that do tend to have something on the cover when not relying on mostly contrasting colors or pictures of flowers framing the name of the book, tend to only have our main female protagonist, Angel or Sarah, on the front. Often in a red dress, which I could speculate having dozens of meanings to why that color in specific, but we'd be here all day. Sometimes she has other manners of dress, but apart from the movie cover version, there isn't that much to speak of in variation. They're all more or less the same manner of boring cover, but I guess when you have an evangelical audience, you don't really need to try that hard. In any case, let's move on to the actual synopsis of the book. Now, the synopsis of this book is both fairly easy to describe, but a lot more complicated than I wish it was. The simple description is that this is a rewrite of the Gomer and Hosea story from the Bible. I really hope I'm saying that name right. I'm going to put it somewhere on my screen to spell it out. But I believe it's pronounced Hosea. My mom, it's probably not. It's probably like Hosea or something like that. I very rarely have heard this name said. But now it's set in the 1850s gold rush era of California. God has told Michael Hosea, our stand-in for the other Hosea, that he is to go to the town of Paradise and meet his future wife, a woman named Angel. No, I don't actually mean that figuratively, but there'll be time to discuss that later. The story mostly involves Michael attempting to prove to Angel that he loves her and wants to marry her, while Angel refuses to believe it due to her traumatic past. And also because this guy literally slips a ring on her finger when she's half dead and declares her his new wife. But before I start to rant about that, I want to make something very clear. Yes, this is a Christian book. And yes, dear old Afrodo here isn't a Christian man. I honestly say I'm more agnostic than I am atheist, believing that maybe there is a higher power, but do we actually know or understand what it wants or is? No, probably not. In any case, I bring this up at the beginning so I can be very transparent with you as I delve into this book, which undoubtedly has a mostly Christian fan base. I do not like this book. And I won't lie, it feels like a great deal of Christian books are not very good when you aren't required to sycophantically worship it on principle. Take a look at Night Flight. But that being said, that doesn't mean I hate Christian books on principle. I went into this book with pure intentions of reading it and hoping that the things I'd heard about it was wrong and I would end up enjoying it. To a degree, I did. You see, following the character of Angel, or Sarah as is her birth name, proved to be a rather fascinating read at first. The first 45 pages of this book are entirely about her past and how she ends up in the position she's in when Michael enters the story. And they're fairly decent. It's a fairly decent read. It gets a bit too much on the trauma Congo line for me near the end, but it feels real, and when you definitely feel for the character and her position as time goes on. The personal story that Angel goes through on this book is an interesting one, and it's very fitting for the woman, especially near the end. The story of Sarah becoming Angel and then going back to Sarah is a good one. I root for her as she tries to overcome this trauma. I root for her near the end when, after coming to terms with what she's gone through and escaping, like truly escaping that life mentally as much as physically, she tries to help other people who have been forced into that life. The problem I really have with this book is actually the romance portion of this book, and more importantly, the male component of the romance, Michael Hosea. This hypocritical, domineering prick made reading the story very hard, because I pretty much wanted to reach into the book at several points and throttle the self-righteous asshole myself several times over. And it has nothing to do with the fact that he literally talks to God in his head, which is an aspect of the book I'm not even gonna touch. No, it's directly related to how he treats Sarah for a good portion of this book. Michael comes into the story being told by God that he is going to marry Sarah, as that is the wife that has been chosen for him. Notable in that Sarah does not get a say in this arrangement, and Michael, from the get-go, is not shy about the fact that he's not going to take no as an answer. Now, this story could have worked if maybe Michael understood that you can't just walk up to the most popular woman in a brothel and declare you're going to take her for a wife right away, and actually attempted to, romance her, maybe get to know her as a person, maybe try to actually create some chemistry between the two of them, have Sarah want to marry him before he declares that you're gonna be my wife. Give her some agency in the direction of a future, maybe?
And he said the same thing he always did just before he left.
Come away with me. Marry me.
I already said no. 3 times. Don't you ever get the message? No, no, no.
You're not happy here.
I wouldn't be any happier with you.
How do you know?
I know.
Put on something you can travel in and come with me. Right now. Don't think about it so much. Just do it.
For the last time. No.
She said firmly and reached for the doorknob. He caught her wrist.
What's keeping you here?
She pulled her wrist free.
I like it.
She yanked the door open.
Now, get out.
I'll see you tomorrow.
No, he makes no real effort to get to know Sarah as a person. All he cares about is that it has been decided that she will be his wife, and that's what he wants. One of the hardest things to read about this book is how Sarah, who at this point we've seen a good portion of her traumatic backstory, and have seen the hints that it got much worse after we left her, with one of the major factors of the trauma is that she's never been allowed her own independence or agency in where her life goes, being treated as nothing more than an object to be conquered by Michael. Now the story dresses this up in an unconditional love by Michael, who is merely following the Lord's word and having faith in what God told him. But this passage right here, to me, reads like Michael doesn't even consider her a person with her own feelings and wants and desires.
Forget it. Just forget I ever asked for a wife. I don't need one that badly.
Michael?
I'll stay celibate.
Michael?
He kept walking.
God, why her? Tell me that. Why not a gently reared girl, untouched until her wedding night? Why not a God-fearing widow? Lord, send me a plain woman, kind and enduring, someone who would work at my side in the fields, plowing, planting, and harvesting, someone who'll get dirt beneath her fingernails but doesn't have it already in her blood, someone to give me children, or someone with children already if it's not in your plan for me to have my own. Why do you tell me to marry a harlot?
This is the woman I have chosen for you.
But it's more than that. There are so many examples in this book about how Michael barely considers Sarah's feelings or requests about anything because he doesn't want to. Like, he won't respect the fact that she's told him no repeatedly to his proposal and continuously insists that she's going to marry him. For no other reason than it's been decided she's going to marry him. See the above quote. And the above quote is one of the examples of how he treats her like an object to be owned. But you might argue that I'm taking this out of context. Well, here's a more direct example. For reference, Angel has in no way agreed to his marriage proposal, has never entertained the idea, has made it repeatedly clear she doesn't want to entertain the idea, and is insistent that he leave her alone.
Yes, it's me again.
He walked in and slammed the door behind him. Her brows rose. An angry man could be unpredictable and dangerous. This one could do a lot of damage to her without much effort.
I'm not getting anywhere with you, am I?
It's not my fault you're wasting your gold.
She said quietly.
I did warn you the very first night, remember?
She sat down on the end of the bed.
I haven't misled you.
I've got to go back to the valley and get some work done.
I'm not stopping you.
His face was pale and rigid.
I don't want to leave you here in this godforsaken place.
She blinked at his outburst.
It's not your business.
It became my business the minute I saw you.
That whole line where he says, "It became my business the second I saw you," thing wouldn't have been okay even if Angel was showing interest in Michael. This is him, without any reason to do so, in her eyes, trying to take control of her life to the point that he's dictated her future when she has never entertained his thoughts of being married or anything in the slightest. In fact, she's quite clear she doesn't want to marry him. She's given so little agency about anything involving her own life throughout a good portion of this book that I actually felt dirty about something I was doing in my notes. Since the book starts with giving us Sarah's backstory, we're able to learn her real name and what she's going through long before Michael even enters the story, eventually concluding that Angel is a name that she picked up after life forced her down the path of a woman of the night. Now, in the narrative of the story, the name Angel is clearly there because it allows Sarah to disassociate from the horrible things that have happened to her, and are continuing to happen to her onto a new identity. In the age-old, I'm not Sarah anymore. Sarah was killed by this traumatic event. And that's fine. It's a decent narrative trope to fall back on. However, the reason I felt dirty calling Sarah by her name, by her birth name, I should say, in my notes is because Michael is such a sanctimonious prick about her name, to the point that it felt wrong that I wasn't using the name she chose for herself. To the point it felt wrong that I wasn't using Sarah's chosen name for herself in the notes. Despite the fact that she asks and tells him multiple times that she wants to be called Angel, he does everything in his power to almost never call her that name. He calls her everything else under the sun except the name she's asking to be called.
I'm not going to hurt you, Mara.
He said gently.
I love you.
It wasn't the first time that a man had said he loved her.
I'm flattered.
She said dryly. When he didn't say anything more, she clenched the blanket in her fist.
By the way, my name isn't Mara. It's Angel. You ought to get the name right if you're going to put the ring on my finger.
Michael came outside.
Mara.
He said. His gentle voice was like salt on her wounds.
My name isn't Mara. It's Angel. Angel.
No, it isn't. And I'll call you by what I see.
Michael saw the flatness in her blue eyes, and it broke his heart.
You keep shutting me out. Tirza, stay with me.
Is it Tirza now?
Oh, Jesus, help me. Stop running from me.
And this is all the better when Michael, being the hypocritical prick he is so mad about the fact that Angel refuses to call him by his name that he prays to God about it and then literally forces her to say it.
More than anything, Michael was consumed with the need to hear her say his name.
Just once. Jesus. God, please, just once.
Michael, an acknowledgement of his existence. Most of the time she looked right through him. He wanted to be more than someone walking on the periphery of her soul, someone she was convinced would step on her and use her.
You want to please me? Say my name.
His breath mingled with hers.
You said you wouldn't say no to anything I asked of you. Remember? I want you to say my name. Anything you said. Can't you keep your word?
His calm left.
Say it!
Michael.
She ground out. He cupped her face.
Look at me. Say it again.
It's like, how does the author write these scenes and not have any self-awareness of what she's writing? And unfortunately, this isn't the only action that made me feel dirty and gross inside, as we teeter much closer to Michael being abusive than him being loving. While Michael claims he doesn't agree with his father's view on women needing to be dominated, the longer you read the story, the more it feels like he only means that in a purely carnal sense. He doesn't want to dominate Angel in the bedroom, but he clearly has no issue controlling her in all other aspects of her life. In addition to what I mentioned before, he refuses to let her wear what she wants.
What happened to all of my things?
Got them. Besides, what you had wouldn't suit you now anyway. A farmer's wife doesn't wear satin and lace.
He gets angry and berates her when she says things he doesn't like.
She rested her hands in her lap and looked at him indolently.
Whatever you want, mister.
That got to him.
I hate that phrase. Whatever you want. Like you're offering me coffee. We'd better get one thing straight. I married you for better or worse, and until death parts us.
And at one point, after Angel has a terrible nightmare from a clearly traumatic memory that she has, and doesn't want to talk about it with Michael, he literally forces her out of the house into the dark woods to a location he refuses to tell her, all while she's naked. As a reader, this is especially vile because we know that this nightmare has to do with a traumatic past where she was basically a forced pleasure slave for a man known as the Duke, who gave her no control in what she did.
Michael ripped the bed covers off. Bunching them, he tossed them on the trunk in the corner.
Get up. Now. You're going, whether you like it or not.
Angel was frightened of him as he loomed over her. She could sense him trying to rein in his temper.
We're gonna take a little walk,
he said.
Now? In the middle of the night?
It was cold and dark. She gasped as he scooped her up and set her on her feet. Pulling on his pants, he said,
You can go dressed or naked. It's all the same to me.
She didn't like the shadows in the cabin, and she wasn't going out that door into the darkness.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here.
She headed for the quilt, but he caught her arm and spun her around.
Look, I've said before, I'm no therapist, I'm no expert in matters of mental issues. But I can promise you this. I'm fairly sure physically intimidating someone who just had a nightmare into leaving a house naked into the dark woods is not a good idea. And the fact that Michael has the gall to be offended that she thinks he's going to hurt her after this is... It's like this man has no awareness of what he's doing, despite the narrative treating him as a wise prophet who might be rough around the edges, but is ultimately doing God's will and then spreading his unconditional love. And I hear all of you asking, well, if Angel seems so unhappy in this marriage at the start and shows multiple instances of wanting to leave, why did she agree to marry Michael in the first place? I mean, marriage is a two-way street and it generally requires consent from both parties. And as much as Michael is being a prick about everything involving it, she still agreed to the marriage, right? Not really, actually. You see, I mentioned this at the very start, just before I got deep into this review. But Michael doesn't marry Angel with her permission. Not really. He has her permission in the most technical sense in that she more or less said, fuck it. But the way he gets it made me actually set down the book and stare in shock that this was supposed to be seen as a romantic book. How does he get her to marry him?
You want to take her home? Fine, I'll gift wrap her.
The Duchess said.
But you're going to pay first.
Woman, have you no decency? Another man's voice. This girl will be lucky to live. The door slammed. Pain exploded in Angel's head and she groaned. She could hear two men talking. One of them spoke to her.
Want to marry you before we leave together.
Marry her? She gave a whimpering laugh. Someone took her hand. She thought it was Lucky at first, but Lucky's hand was soft and small. This one was large and hard, the skin rough with calluses.
Just say yes.
She would agree to wed Satan himself if it would get her out of the palace.
Why not?
She managed. She drifted on a sea of pain and quiet voices.
How long have I been here?
She asked.
3 days.
3 days?
You've been delirious for most of it. Your fever broke yesterday afternoon. Can you remember anything?
No.
Yeah, you read that right. Michael marries Angel by effectively coercing a marriage out of her after she's been beaten near death. By the book's own words, at this point in time, she is literally hours from a beating that left her with a dislocated shoulder, a cracked collarbone, 4 broken ribs, and a severe concussion, while also being doped up on laudanum to help her recover from the pain. In Angel's own words, in this scene, she would have agreed to marry anyone in the state she was in, and Michael treats this as an ironclad bondage to him. Despite her multiple attempts to give him back the rings, multiple statements saying she didn't agree to marry him, even correctly pointing out she did not say yes. She said, why not? And even making more than one attempt to leave Michael behind, only to be continuously chased back down by the man himself. In fact, the one time Michael actually just lets her leave and leaves it to her choice if she's going to come back is the one time he would have been most justified in chasing after her and trying to bring her back. Because the division wasn't caused through a fault on either side. It was caused by something neither could have controlled. And this wouldn't have been as bad if there was at least some manner of chemistry between Michael and Angel at this point. Maybe some manner of actual romance between them. This could have easily been a chance to have Sarah, who could have already been smitten with Michael, but afraid to take the steps to actual commitment, be pressed into it. Instead, we have a woman who barely knows a man who made no attempt to get to know her beyond telling her, "You're my wife now," has been that wasn't even chosen by him, but by outside forces, forcing her to get married while she's barely coherent. But according to
Michael's frustrations built, and he started thinking about his father, who had claimed every woman wanted to be dominated. Michael hadn't believed it then, and he didn't believe it now. But he almost wished he could.
Now, while I would love to give you a rating right here and now and just in this review, there is one more thing I have to talk about. The Christian forces behind this work. Now, I've stated before that I have no real problem with the book being Christian-based inherently, but I often find that Christian influences in a book end up weighing it down. Typically, it's almost like the author aims at a Christian audience simply because they'll buy any old crap so long as it has characters that constantly praise God. Like, again, in Night Flight, where the characters were Christian and the book was promoted as being a Christian book, but it mostly just amounted to the characters every so often praying to God and then thanking him for stuff they themselves did. There's no attempt to weave theming or lessons into what it means to be Christian, to follow in all loving God's teachings. It's just there to preach or to pander. And this book isn't the worst when it comes to Christian values. It doesn't really preach at you, and I was actually pleasantly surprised when in the book itself, God tells Michael off for wanting to preach at Angel at the wrong time. But ultimately, it has the reverse problem I just mentioned. While it's weaved in the book and is part of the character's identity beyond simply, I pray to God and then I thank him for the thing I myself did, the Christian influence of this book rears its ugly head in more the theming and especially near the end. What I mean by that is, it comes up when the whole thing where Sarah leaves Michael because it's revealed she can't have kids because she was forcibly sterilized during her past as a pleasure slave. Sarah doesn't see herself as a complete woman And Michael genuinely worries how the marriage is going to work because now she can't have kids. And the book agrees with them. The book almost says, how can Sarah be a complete woman if she can't give Michael kids? And how can Michael be happy with a wife who can't bear his spawn? I almost said the other word that would probably get me banned. To the point that when she runs away again, this is the only time when Michael doesn't chase after her, when he would have been most justified in following her and trying to bring her back, assuring her that he loves her even despite the fact that she can't have biological children. Because that's not what loving a person's about. Loving a person is not, can they give me kids? But that's not the direction the book takes. Don't worry though. The story has a happy ending since, like the namesake Sarah from the Bible, somehow her infertility disappears and they have 4 kids in the end. So she is a complete woman. 3 out of 10.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
So, this is going to be a complicated rating to explain. Although the book itself is nowhere near as bad as something like The Rising by Brian Keene, which shares the same score, I ultimately feel it deserves a similar rating. It's well written, and as you can see from my brief moment when I did try to tab it, it ultimately came down to my issues being one main thing: Michael Hosea and how he treats Angel. If the romance from this book was entirely divorced from it, or ended with Angel leaving the last time and never coming back, I would have scored it much, much higher, because Sarah's story is ultimately the more fascinating and sympathetic one. But Michael is just so hard to read about in the earlier chapters of this book. I find it hard to even like his scenes on principle, because I found him to be such a hypocritical, sanctimonious prick. That's actually what his nickname was in my notes after a certain point. The romance of this story almost has no chemistry to speak of, and all of it is forced through this lens of Christian marriage and redemption without the actual care to the traumas it's trying to represent. I want to be clear, the Christian overtones of this book aren't terrible, but they aren't helping the book with how they're used. Themes like this aren't good to me. It perpetuates harmful belief that women aren't real women if they can't make babies, and then do it for their husband. So ultimately, I find it hard to like many aspects of this book, and while I could have rated it a 4 out of 10, thus admitting that while I didn't like it, I could understand why others do, I can't bring myself to do it. Because while I do understand why people would like this book apart from me, I don't think they should. Like I said, this book was really hard to read, and I don't think there are lessons in this book that you should be taken away from. It's not a romance that's worth the genre, and it's not self-aware enough that these are meant to be purposeful flaws to a bygone eras that we advanced beyond. That's why in the end, when I ask the question of whether or not this book deserves Mount Doom, I'm forced to conclude yes. Because all the reasons I stated. There's a lot of books out there that have better romances. I'd even recommend some other Mount Doom books over this one, because at least there's some chemistry between the characters. And you get the feeling the main couple actually, like each other in the end, and not one side has developed Stockholm Syndrome in order to cope. That's all I got. Just remember, everyone, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure, yeah, it's worth having, but God, why do I do this to myself?